Welcome to the Consultant's Way podcast, your go-to resource for all things professional services consulting. Brought to you by McMann and Ransford, a strategy consulting firm with over 30 years of experience helping B2B organizations achieve sustainable growth, and the Consultant's Way, the leading comprehensive consultant development program. Hosted by Dean McMann and Anthony Paluska, we share expert insights, firsthand experiences, and conversations with industry leaders on the topics that interest you most.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of their employer, company, or affiliated organizations.
Welcome back to the Consultant's Way podcast. Anthony Paluska and Dean McMann, and today we're joined by Drew McKechnie. Drew, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Drew, we're excited to dive into this conversation with you. We've been talking to you a lot about many of these topics for years now, as we've kind of got to know you a little bit better and gone through this journey. But before we dive into the topic at hand, brief introduction for me, right? Drew leads the consulting services commercialization at Google Cloud, and Drew has lots of experience working with all the different consulting and professional services group within Google, but also has a passion for this and spends lots of time focusing on the professional services community and like us, trying to better that group. So Drew, we're happy to have you here. Drew, provide a little bit more of an introduction of yourself for the audience.
No, thanks, Anthony and Dean. So basically, prior to Google, which I think you covered pretty well, I did about 20 years in management consulting. I was in the Washington, D.C. area, so I had a lot of public and private sector customers, heavily into the federal government, civilian defense, and intelligence for a number of your favorite firms inside the Beltway. And really came up through, a couple of really good, solid firms where I cut my teeth. And so that's one of the things that's made me passionate about this topic of, what is sort of the cheat code for your first 10 years out of school? And, how can you start to differentiate yourself? So that's where the passion for this topic came from. And I'm eager to share that with you guys today.
Hey, Drew, aren't you glad you're not in any federal practice today?
Yeah, it's a tough environment they're going through right now. I think, obviously leaving the politics out of it, I think there's a way to do government efficiency. I think a lot of government employees would be advocates of doing it a certain way. I'm not sure this is that way. But I think what we've seen so far is that the government is actually pretty efficient. That's much smaller than they've been, 10, 20 years ago in terms of footprint. And, again, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, where we're spending the money and providing constituent services, it turns out they're doing a pretty good job.
Yep. Well, Drew, you alluded to this just a bit ago, which is the topic that we want to dive into with you, which is your words for it, right? The cheat code for your first 5 to 10 years of entering the consulting world. You work with a lot of early stage and early career consultants. And at one point you were an early career consultant. And so you've lived it, but you also coached and mentored others through that journey. At the highest level, why do you view this topic as so important? And I think, as we've talked about, sort of underappreciated and undercovered. And there just isn't the cheat code out there that you might suggest that there is, and you might be able to guide some of the newer consultants in their careers on how to navigate that journey. So maybe just take that at the top level for us.
Yeah, it comes from a couple of places, right? I think one, as budgets get tightened, as AI, as other things have disrupted, as different situations and different hiring and resourcing situations have changed, some of the things that get cut are training. It gets harder in some of these firms as people get more virtual and they're less co-located to provide good mentoring, good coattails, good, one-on-one conversation between management directors and sort of the frontline employees. So I think there's a gap there that makes this a little harder to have obvious places to go get this type of training today. But then also I think there's a huge opportunity here. I think, in any sort of place where you have good fundamentals, a good foundation, you put yourself on a totally different trajectory than your peer group. And it's not that there's not a high bar. There is a high bar, but I think the standard, I think it's less obvious. A lot of people look at consulting as a black box. Well, what's a consultant? What do you do? and to me, it's sort of a fancy word for problem solving, right? I come in, I figure out what's going on, I recommend some changes, I help them implement them. It's really not any more complicated than that. But there's a lot of aspects of the business that can be somewhat intimidating. We use a lot of lingo. A lot of that makes it maybe less accessible for some people. So I want to dispel all that. I want to arm the people I talk to, whether they're folks in my alma mater, whether they're startup founders that I mentor, whether it's just somebody, in the neighborhood asking me, hey, what their kid should do after graduation. I try to be candid and I try to have those conversations. Like there are a couple of things you can do to prepare yourself to immediately set yourself apart from your peers. And it doesn't need to be so opaque and confusing. It's relatively straightforward.
Yeah, and I want to dive into some of those tactics and some of those suggestions that you have. But before we even do that, something Dean and I have covered a lot on this and just in separate conversations is kind of looking at the landscape of the industry. And you touched on a couple of these topics. One is a little bit more of the remote work, a lot more of the digital or virtual delivery mechanisms. AI is another one like this. We are seeing much more in the consulting industry, whether that's pure play firms or embedded within technology companies, the rise of the more senior resources going onto client sites, where the more junior resources are spending time in their early careers working on things, but not interacting with the client, but more importantly, not getting the exposure to partners and senior leaders within their firm to learn some of these practices. And we worry quite a bit about, okay, how do we grow the next generation of consultants if they're not actually there participating in these situations? And AI is even making that more difficult because you start to offload some of the tasks that you might have given to an entry-level consultant to technology. And so those are good development opportunities. And I just feel like we're seeing less and less just traditional development opportunities, to your point. And I don't know where that leaves us in 10 years from a consulting industry. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely an evolution happening here, and I think it's happening quite quickly. I didn't know some of those specifics and sort of that dichotomy between on-site and off-site, as it's been a bit since I've been customer-facing. But it's a little disheartening, honestly. I mean, whether there can be clear roles and responsibilities. Obviously, there's sort of a clear division of labor between more senior and junior resources, but not having those reps, not having those at-bats, not having those 10,000 hours from Malcolm Gladwell, right? Not having that exposure. It's tough. How do you develop executive presence? How do you develop confidence? How do you get better public speaking? How do you get better at data-driven storytelling? If you're just using the latest tools and prompts and things and throwing it over a wall, that in and of itself is not differentiated. All three of us could do that and come up with pretty decent answers. But if we apply our different years of experience to that and we have a point of view that then is aided by the data, we can tell a much more compelling story. It's easier to tell that story if you've met the person, if you know them, you know your audience, you know how it's going to be received. And losing some of that human connection, just looking at these little 2D images on the screen all the time, right? We're animals. We are social creatures. And so something gets lost, I think, if we don't keep that muscle trained. So, as appropriate as cost structures allow, different travel arrangements, all that fun stuff. I know there are a lot of realities there, but I think the more often you can get your junior resources in front of customers and in environments where they can learn and get that practical experience, I think it'll pay dividends, not just to them, but I think for the client and for your home organization.
Drew, we 2 or 3 years ago when we started really training in a more less in person and a more distance, as you know, the business we're in, and we started doing more reviews of junior people. We have been fascinated to find that in addition to what we would call real consulting skills, both work and client relationship skills, there's a lot of skills that we're having to teach now that are just, presence, look and feel, how to attend a meeting, I was actually on where I sit with a CEO on a company, and they were having a big firm do a project, and I sat in as his rep. And one of the consultants, a nice person, asked, gave the CEO of this big company 1 hour from which to choose from for his interview. You've got to meet with me at 10 a.m. tomorrow.
Right.
And I made a joke. I said, yeah, we don't get that to year 2, how to talk to a CEO. Right?
Right.
So, so it's more from just consultative skills to just, hey, you're part of a community and a business and everything. And I know you guys, one of the great things about your organization and you talking about it is you actually do bring in a lot of junior consultants, unlike a lot of what we call captive consulting in product companies.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there's a couple of things there, right? I mean, I think, I talked about, standards. And one of the things I always say is, like, don't trip over the low bar, right? Be where you say you're going to be. Do what you say you're going to do. Follow up. Send emails, right? Again, the basics. You sort of, it pains me to say it, but we've lost some of those fundamentals. I sound like an old basketball coach now or something, but, the fundamentals
Or
matter,
just
right?
an old man, just literally.
No, I appreciate that. I do feel a bit extinguished. But no, first and foremost, I think being an effective communicator, right? Like, be personable and engaging. Look people in the eye. There's some folks now, and again, personal idiosyncrasies and interpersonal, foibles aside, too much eye contact can be threatening. Like, we have some things to overcome, whether that's nature or nurture, whether we're a product of our environment there, and we've gone to virtual. I want to be accommodating to people with all sorts of, interpersonal differences and things, but at the same time, this is a human business. There's great IP, there's great technical tools, but at the end of the day, do I want to do business with the person I'm sitting across from? Do I trust them? Do I like working with them? If we're going to be on this engagement for a couple of years and do this big digital transformation, am I going to enjoy myself? Right? It's more than a resume. It's, do I enjoy spending time with this person? Do we build trust and credibility over time? So I think, again, the bar there is relatively low. And some easy things to do there is just be proactive. Set an agenda ahead of a call. Draft, ghostwrite an email for your manager to send to the customer. If they're not letting you come on site or they're not letting you meet with the customer directly, hey, here's a quick document with some ideas to sort of scope out this email. You're going to go ahead and send it, but I took a shot at it for you. Or just follow-ups. We're doing a bunch of data gathering interviews. I mean, nobody says thank you anymore. I mean, whether it's in person or with a follow-up email, or if you have a follow-up question or you want to validate, hey, did I hear this right? Did I capture this properly? Really appreciated your perspective, your point of view here. I'm going to want to come back to you at some point. It'd be nice if we had a good rapport. So I think being an effective communicator there, while the bar is relatively low, it's not one we can trip over.
Yeah, and so I completely agree. Right, the bar doesn't have to be incredibly high in order for us to make sure that we're doing the little things that should be very foundational to communication, to follow up, to being a proactive team member, and trying to appreciate that everybody else in your team has a lot on their plate. So any little head start that you could provide somebody when you have some spare capacity or time is helpful, but it's also good practice for you. As you kind of look across the landscape of all entry level or new, it could pick within the first 10 years or so. I know something that you're really big on is, right, how do you make yourself stand out, and how do you differentiate yourself when you're in that level? That's part of your cheat code, right? Because opportunity comes to those that stand out and get that opportunity, and by doing that, then you actually get the chance to grow and accelerate your career. How do you view this concept of kind of differentiating yourself, of standing out from the crowd when you're in a cohort of a bunch of new hires? What are the couple of traits or characteristics that cause somebody to jump out to you?
Yeah, I know people talk about presence and visibility and relationships and all that, and that's great. But for me, it's one thing. It's how quickly can I switch from delegating you tasks to giving you ownership, right? So any new consultant can be told exactly what to do, what methodology to consult, what template to use, what tactical steps, to do toward the facilitation of a key meeting or development of a deliverable. But the sooner you can be provided with just the outcome, right, and ask a couple of follow-up questions, and then you get started iterating that solution, the better. The key shift is, I think, going from you asking me like who, what, where, when, why, and taking a bunch of copious notes and then, nervously starting about your task, to giving me a proposal for the thing I asked for. And you're asking clarifying questions. You're making assumptions. You're proactively reaching out to your customers. Hey, it's a kickoff meeting. What did we do last time? Hey, do we have any templates or agendas from previous engagement we did? I know you've done a lot of these things, right? What stakeholders need to be there? Is it just the contracting manager and the PM, or is there key members of the customer team that we're going to want to engage early, so we need to make them feel like a part of this initial team at kickoff? What are the optics of these things, right? The quicker I don't have to spell it all out for you, and you can start to do some of that on your own, I mean, that's huge. That we use all this lingo, right? That gives me leverage, right? It creates leverage for my manager, for me as a manager, and allows me to use my time and energy sort of more strategically. So I'm going to love that. But at the same time, as you start to master this skill, as you get experience in this skill, kind of like the Feynman technique, right? Like when you're good enough at this and comfortable with this, where you don't need any little guidance, you can actually teach other people to do it and create leverage for yourself. Maybe you don't love running kickoff meetings. You're good at it. You know what to do. You can quickly come up with the materials and send out the invites and get it ready. But maybe you want to do other things. Maybe you want to get into analytics. Maybe you want to dive into more of the deck building and slide craft and some of the other things. Well, if you've done enough of it, you can actually, create a great opportunity for someone else on the team to backfill you, to train them up on this new role, and you get to go do something else. Sort of put yourself out of the job, right? Delegate the things you don't like to do and double down on your strengths and start hacking away at that learning curve. So I think there's growth opportunities there just from getting good at the basics and then transition it to somebody else. And again, now you have an advocate. You're not necessarily managing people yet, but you've helped develop people. And that's a nice thing to be able to say as well. So again, there's a lot of things about differentiating, but if I can do less handholding, if I can give you more autonomy, I mean, you're not gonna hate that. Less micromanaging, less, you come to me and ask a couple of questions rather than me giving you all the details. That's the dream.
Yeah, Drew, I think you said that really well. It's about, will you take ownership? If you'll take ownership, I'll be glad to help you on the journey. But keep making me have ownership, that puts you in a box that you don't want to be in over time.
Right.
Yeah. And that's
it. You want me in some of the key client meetings. You want me reviewing you in deliverables. You don't want me telling you how to write an agenda.
Right.
You don't want me telling you how to write an email to invite someone to a meeting. You really don't. Right. I have a point of view. You probably don't want me, in there telling
absolutely. You're the one on the ground. No, I agree with that completely. And we always say, if you're passing the buck up to me, I may not know what you know. Right. So it's better for you to experiment and learn and then use me as a reference. Right.
No, I think leadership, knowledge, functional, technical, domain knowledge can come from anywhere. If we're going to believe that, show me something.
Yeah. Hey, I have a question of an interesting thing we've seen over the last couple of years.
Sure.
And it's I don't want to do that. I don't find that interesting. So the episodic quality of work from some of the more junior people.
I mean, I think there's a couple things there, right? At some level, I appreciate the shift in work-life balance. I appreciate the shift of, not everybody, it's a career. Some people, it's a job. People have different value structures and all of that. And I'm not trying to change minds on that front. But I will say, Don Draper said famously, right? That's what the money's for. Right. So at the end of the day, there are some fundamental things you have to do. If you're being asked to do something, if it's part of your job description, that's what you do. And there are tools like I just walked through where if you get good at it, even if you hate it, if you get good at it, you can teach someone else, then you can get it off your plate and go do something you like. So I think there are ways to do it. But I think, saying I don't want to do that is kind of like saying, well, I don't know, I just work here. And one of the big mindset shifts for me is what I call sort of the concierge attitude, right? Like we used to call it active listening, but ironically, I always thought that sounded kind of passive. And I think that term sort of needs a glow up. So I'm calling it concierge attitude. And, we've all sort of seen this, right? You ask somebody a question and they're like, well, I don't know, where you're trying to call the phone company to get something changed, or, hey, I want a new discount you're providing existing customers on my wireless or whatever. They're like, well, that's customer retention. I'm going to have to transfer you over there. I'm not supposed to know what your internal group is called, how, if I call the right number, if I find the right people. I want someone to say, hey, yeah, we do that. Let me connect you with the right person and get you over there. And, I think, ironically, this is sort of the foundation of business development. We talk about business development and proposals and marketing and all this other stuff. Again, some sort of scary, intimidating concept. I'm going to need some hardcore scale skills or something. But in reality, the best way to sell new work is by listening. You hear a customer need, you say, yeah, we do that. Let me go get you somebody. And bring that subject matter expertise, that person, in front of the client, and scope out some new work. And I think it doesn't need to be any harder than that. I have, if you'll let me, I have one example, one story I love to tell. There was a colleague on one of my teams named Steve, who sort of executed this to perfection, right? I love this story because Steve's a guy who, very capable consultant, protective of his work-life balance. He's the kind of guy that, he was very effective on execution, did exactly what he needed to do, was there early, but kind of read the newspaper at lunch and kind of did his own thing. He didn't live and die for every piece of this. He had no aspirations to be a manager. He didn't, join these practice management extracurriculars for people trying to climb the ladder. But he was good at this concierge attitude. He was in a meeting with some client stakeholders that weren't on our core team, and he overheard somebody talking about a business need. And he quickly interjected and said, hey, we do that. And actually, my team over here supporting the CIO office, we have a contract vehicle that allows us to scope work for other extensions of this direct customers organization. And it wasn't any harder than that. He wasn't particularly affluent storyteller. He wasn't a particularly gifted salesman. He just said, yeah, let me go get you the right person. And he brought this to our program manager. We ultimately sole sourced a 9-month task with 3 new people worth almost $1 million. That was a fun conversation at year end. Hey, look what Steve did. Steve did everything we tell junior associates to do. He may not have these aspirations of getting promoted and all these other things, but let's make sure Steve gets a nice bonus. He did exactly what we want him to do. And it's not any scarier or any more complicated than that. And it all stems from saying, instead of, well, that's not really my job, I don't know, saying, hey, yeah, we do that. I don't even have to be a gifted student of the firm yet. I can just pretty confidently say, if I work for a big place, yeah, we've got somebody that does that. Let me go find them, and can I have them circle back Friday and follow up with you? So easy.
Yeah, I think, Dean, you talked about it from the direction of, we have team members that are trying to balance the kind of work they do and what they do. And Drew, you just kind of spoke to hey, you don't have to have these aspirations to be more than even what role you're in right now in order to do the right thing by the organization, by your client. I think there's also a little bit of the product of this over siloization that's occurred in a lot of big companies where we've had to define really clearly swim lanes and decision rights and ownership rights. And we, to your point, Drew, we impose our org structure and our operating model onto our clients rather than embracing okay, what does the customer actually need? And then let me figure out the right way to go and solve that. And let me keep my eyes and ears peeled for how do I help the customer and how do I help my own organization? And I'll find the right way to get it done. That doesn't mean I'm signing up to do all the work. It just means I might have access, and professional services, consulting, right? They find themselves in this situation more than probably almost any other function because they are living with the client, delivering work in real time. They have to have that freedom, that autonomy, that all of those things to make some of those determinations and then actually make some of that possible for clients. I don't know, Drew, if you have any perspective on, have we overstructured things so much that we're actually hindering people's attitudes of saying, well, what's best for the overall organization instead of, hey, what is my job? How do I need to get in, get out? Is that an incentive problem? Is that a structure problem? Is that a people problem? Do you have any thoughts there?
I think there are different schools of thought on this, but for me, the first 5 or so years was really about becoming an inch deep and a mile wide. It's sort of like raising kids a little bit, not to be biased, but I have an almost 8-year-old right now, and you want to expose them to different things, see what they're good at, see what they like to do, what they don't like to do. Are there fundamental things that they should be exposed to so they know how to do it if they're ever in a situation where it's important, right? Same thing applies here, right? Give them a little taste of human capital management, a little bit of org design, some business process reengineering, a little bit of strategy, finance, analytics, business case development, IT governance. There's plenty of places, and you can leverage other materials, you can leverage training, you can leverage certifications. You don't have to do all the hand-holding, but you can expose them to these things. And I think it's up for them to determine. We don't want them picking a specialty for 4 or 5 years anyway, in my opinion, because we need 5-tool players. We need people that are coachable, that can go in a variety of situations, that can connect dots. And we're also helping them, again, that famous phrase, we're helping them become students of the firm by giving them exposure to these different things. By the time it's their 3rd or 4th engagement, they know a human capital SME that spoke at a conference. They know who a great resume is to put in front of a customer on strategy. They know someone who did that work at the same organization for a different part of the customer, just from exposure. And it also helps them figure out, okay, what do they want to do when they do go and pick a major, so to speak, when they do say, hey, I want to keep you in an inch deep, mile wide. I want to be a business manager. I want to develop this book of business of this client and just know everything about this client on a domain specialty. Or, hey, I want to be a resume. I want to go speak at conferences. I want to write papers. I want to be a couple feet wide and a mile deep. I want to be an expert. I want to write books. I want to be really good at business intelligence. Great. We need both those people. So I think, while there are benefits, there are efficiencies, while having a practice identity, while having alignment, I think it does solve some problems and makes it easier to sort of put people together and develop specializations and methodologies and frameworks and white papers and, points of view within a firm. Let's not lose sight of cross-pollination, cross-selling, cross-exposure. There's a lot of, we've seen it, right? As you get more senior, you see how these things come together. You're able to ask if this is true, what else is true. But if we develop a bunch of siloed people, we have to do all the dot connecting ourselves.
Yeah, I think that it's a great point that early in your career, you're learning how to think and how to be a consultant.
Right.
Right. I've had many specialties across my long career, right? Started in one industry, moved to another, went to general strategy, but the skills are all transferable if you know how to think and how to do consulting, how to client manage. And I think we do to Anthony's point, we can do a disservice. The other thing I see now a lot in that topic, matter of fact, I just had a post about it, I think today, was the overstructuring the work. We structure work to allow you to have freedom to think.
Right.
It is not so you only do it that way. And I see that today as the overstructure of work where I did tasks A, B, C, and D, and it didn't work. But I'm not responsible. Well, you are responsible.
No, I think we can have differentiated points of view. We can have differentiated client rosters and amounts of experience, and we can write white papers and do great industry surveys and tabulate results and things. And I think that's important. But at the end of the day, let's not be too precious. Let's not overcomplicate this stuff. I want paratrooper consultants. I want someone I can drop out of a plane. They can get there. They can figure out what they need to do, right? There's only so many ways to approach this problem, right? You show up, current state assessment, as is, to be, gap analysis, implementation plan, strategic comms, change management. That's it. That's really it. To almost every situation.
Hey, don't take the romance out of this, Drew.
Right, but they're different flavors. There's tons of different ways you can do that. But those are the pieces. I want people that understand the basic structure and the basic framing, and then go get expertise. Go try it. I would say do the MBA thing. Let's bounce a couple frameworks off this. What do we think? What do we know about the problem? We jump into slidecraft and developing the solution. Well, have we had time to think about what do we know about this? Is anybody else having this problem? Have we seen this before? Is there an outlier? Is there some other symptom here we're not giving enough attention? So I think, by providing sort of that broader exposure, people can start to do some of that a little bit more freely. And, while you can have the best out of the box financial analysis practice, or you can have a great robotic process automation or generative AI consulting, great. But everybody is good at the fundamentals. Everybody can sort of set the basic framework and then go connect with the subject matter and technical experts that we need to do those things. But our proven approach, our basics, are sound, and everybody's on the same sheet of music.
Drew, this has been absolutely super, and I don't think we've had anybody as articulate about this as you. And I also want to say I've never seen you clean shaven, so I really appreciate it. So
that's right. I usually have the gray beard. I always try to, I always go for borrowed credibility, right?
Yeah. It seems you're not getting paid for this gig. You could just you didn't need to look that way. That's great. But listen, leave us with a couple of quick takeaways that we, and I love the low bar statement. That's awesome. But a couple of takeaways for our, listeners.
Yeah. So I'm not trying to contradict what I just said about being a good generalist and having the foundations, but I think there is sort of a caveat to that, which is early in your career, have a superpower. Be the go-to person for something useful. And it can be some sexy technical thing like spreadsheet wizardry, or creating compelling slide presentations, or developing infographics, or being an AI prompt guru, or something else, right? And it can help you stand out. But it could also be something less glamorous. Good research skills. You're really good at writing certain proposal sections for some reason, or note taking. And I think this is the most underestimated opportunity in early years of consulting. I think there's nothing glamorous about doing meeting minutes. And I know we're trying to automate this away with, people automatically, transcribing this call and putting that together and pointing out action items. And I think those are great tools. But by taking meeting minutes, again, be the only one that raises your hands. Yeah, I'll do that. You're the only one in the customer's room when they're making decisions. Be aware of conflicts of interest, be aware of competitively sensitive information, but see how decisions are made. How does your customer think about these things? What are their priorities? What are they putting money against? What do they struggle with? What do they have trouble making decisions about? When does a decision meeting become an informational meeting? How can we help? I mean, there's so much perspective, the play Hamilton, right? The room where it happens. There's no substitute. I'm sorry, it might not be the most glamorous thing to be the guy in the corner or girl in the corner taking notes on their laptop quietly and saying, hey, did I get that right? So, this was the vote, or we decided not to vote, or we're going to have a Tiger team do this, or we're going to follow up in 2 weeks in an out-of-cycle meeting or something. Again, not glamorous. But you want to know how an organization works and thinks and makes decisions that maybe you could capitalize on, decisions that you could help inform, predict where their business is going and help them with over-the-horizon opportunities and challenges. The only way you're going to get exposure to that is to be in the room. So again, whatever it is, it can be something great. I know for a while it was pivot tables. And then it was Microsoft Access. And then it was web design, and then it was being a slide ninja, and then it was, there's always a new thing, right? I think prompt engineering. How can I bring AI to its needs to give me the best research for my product? How can I get good source material? I think, data science, library science, these are things that have all evolved. But it can be as simple as doing good research or taking meeting minutes. But be a go-to person for something. I think that's one key piece of it.
Yeah. Be a volunteer. Right? Be a volunteer.
Right.
And earlier you said do some of your boss's work. I cannot tell you how much that helped me early on to just go to my boss and say, hey, I thought about this. I've got this for you. Even if they don't use it, they really appreciate you're trying to loosen their load because they've got all kinds of things to do.
And what's the worst that can happen, right? If you learn you like it. Hey, I'm pretty good at this. Hey, the guy actually, the manager, the director, the client said I had some good ideas. Well, I kind of like that topic. Maybe I want to do more here. Or, I hate this. I know how to do it. Maybe I'm pretty good at it, but I don't want to do it ever again. Well, now I know that. Now I know not to go sign up for that project or raise my hand for that part of the proposal. Maybe what I should do is I should go find who are the people that are really good that like this stuff. Connect those dots, away from me. Help delegate. I always say double down on my strength, delegate my weaknesses, or the things I don't want to do. But have an answer, right? Don't have more questions. Say, hey, Jeannie in human capital is really good at that, and she just did one for this other customer. Can we bring her in? Yeah. That's a great way to sort of pass the buck. Again, you don't want to do.
You're talking about leverage.
100%.
Right? Yeah.
Well, and Drew, before I let you go, it's the one comment I hear most often on your topic of just have your one superpower. So I'd like you to dispel this notion, which is pick spreadsheets, for example, all right? Just being the master Excel guru on the team. I don't want to pigeonhole myself or become known as the spreadsheet guy. And so I don't want to overplay my expertise and my capability there because I want to do some other things so that I don't get stuck in this box. We all have seen people that have gone through that and don't have that problem. But I mean, can you dispel that notion to somebody out there that's saying, hey, I'm really good at spreadsheets, but I don't want to be doing spreadsheets forever. So I'm actually going to downplay that superpower that I have.
I think there's an art and a science to it, right? Have fun with it. If you're truly a master at your craft, you can make it nuanced and different every time. You can. I had a spreadsheet my second day out of college at Booz Allen Hamilton. The second day, I got something in front of a customer that I did in a spreadsheet because I made it look not like a spreadsheet. Just knowing how to do formatting and clean things up and make it very presentable. The numbers were right, but it also didn't look like a spreadsheet. It was really intuitive to read, and all those little flourishes and things. I'm big into slides. Is there something more impressive I wish I was really good at? Absolutely. But I'm probably, top 1%, maybe at this point in my career on slide craft. But, you can play little games. You can work on different things. I want to do a completely different approach to this. I have to leverage this template, but maybe I want to focus on highlighting these figures a little bit differently. I want to do more direct integrations with other visuals and graphs and things. I want to go more heavily into using the client's style guide and their colors and spacing. I want to use more white space. I want to use an economy of words this go round. I want to focus on the voice track and writing speaker notes. I want to focus on the pre-work for knowing my audience and knowing my speaker if it's not me. I mean, there's a million different ways you can make something as rote and as routine as slides or spreadsheets new again. And that's where the true mastery and that's where the artfulness comes in. They say in photography, if you can take a picture of something you see every day and make it look new, and someone doesn't recognize that that's the thing they walk past every day, dropping their kids off at school on the way to work, you've figured something out. And again, is that the most impressive thing? Is it the greatest thing, to be known as the spreadsheet guy? Maybe not. You know what a lot of teams need? Spreadsheet guy. And you know what a lot of clients need, or the client needs to put a presentation for their boss, or the head of their federal agency, or the CEO of their company? They need a spreadsheet guy. The numbers have to be credible. They have to be readable. They have to be easily understandable. So it's been a huge differentiator in my career. It's allowed me to go as far and as fast as I wanted to. They didn't even always know why they liked my slides, but they knew they liked my slides. And like I said, I wish I had a better golf swing. I wish I was a little bit taller. I wish I had a nice jump shot, but I'm really good at slides. And if I can make it new, it's good enough for me.
Yeah. Drew, we're saddened by your lack of sport ability, but we want to, thank you so much. And hey, everybody who's seeing Drew today, you're going to see Drew on and on and on. We're just a huge fan, and we've had a long relationship. And Drew was one of the early big supporters of all that we do, and we really appreciate that.
No, it's nice of you to say. I appreciate the opportunity, and like you said, I do like what you're doing. I think there's a need here. I think to give companies and organizations leverage, even individual consultants leverage to get good training, to get good practical application of this knowledge, get this in their employees' hands or their managers or their leadership's hands, I think is critical, because the quicker we can get this stuff right, the quicker we can get on to doing other fun things.
Amen.
Well, thank you, Drew.
Thanks a lot, gentlemen.
Well, Drew is just one of my favorite folks. Love the way his mind thinks. I love how serious he is about doing this business well. And I love talking about, too few of our friends in our community, our clients, everyone, bring on junior people and develop them, right? And I think it may be it may be too focused on SMEs or experts, or maybe they're intimidated by it. But it can be done. It can be solved, and I think it's important to get the leverage. right? That's the only way you can keep your pyramid, your business, in balance.
Yep. No, he brought up some good points. The one that, and I wish we had some time to talk a little bit more about it, because I was having a conversation last week actually with a prior podcast guest of ours about a very similar topic to what Drew was on, around kind of the inch deep and a mile wide topic, and the big point that we were on, and this guest ex guest of ours was exploring, was, hey, he was thinking that we've actually moved further and further away from people wanting to do that, and specialization has been the priority of things. And he kind of explained this. I'll be curious what your take on this is that, right, especially in the software world, in the fast growth stages up to 100 million and maybe even slightly larger than that, you're able to hire for unicorns, or these multi-sport athletes that can kind of sub in and do all sorts of stuff, and they can cover a lot of the challenges that an organization deals with. But you hit a certain size, and you have to change your hiring profile to specialization, especially if you don't have a big brand like Drew does associated with it. But even them probably deal with that a bit. And once you hire for specialists and experts, you're putting them in this box, and people view their role, and more importantly, view their career path as a ladder. And so I want to go from a senior consultant to a manager to a senior manager, all within consulting, rather than saying, I want to view my career as a career matrix, where maybe I'm going to do some consulting, and then maybe I'll run an account for a little while, and then maybe I'll run a business unit, and maybe then I'll go back to consulting, and I'll pop around, because I've got this inch deep, mile wide mentality. And so this person I was speaking with was on we need to get people out of the mindset of your expertise has a career ladder, and instead you, as a career professional in consulting or otherwise, needs to think of your career as a matrix, and how do you bounce around to get the most experience and exposure as early as possible. And I always think consulting professional services does that, but I'm not sure if you've experienced the same thing.
When I first got out of undergrad school, I got some advice from the CEO of a big company, and it was a he in this case. He just opposed those two things. He said, one, you want to be well-rounded on what the business you're in does, right? And that's your point. But also make sure you've chosen the business that you can end up in a senior role because of your education, background, likes, capabilities. So I think there's a balance. If you're a software executive and you're in a software company, then definitely you need to understand, or hardware or any engineered product. If you're a PS person and you want to stay PS forever, then you need to know all aspects of PS, offer development, practice management, selling, and move around. And then you'll tend to move companies as opposed to within the company. But your point is right. Don't let yourself be just a thing and stay in that narrow, because you'll miss out. And you know how much I'm on be well read, understand the way the world works, because the more you can bring to bear, the more helpful you can be in every situation. And but I'm an example where I have been in consulting all but one job after grad school, and that one job I happened to be at the senior part of a big company. So I'm not sure I gained that much around, but I totally believe with that. The over specialization, it also hurts your ability to be effective as a PS business or a consulting business, because you can't parachute in. You can't have people do different things. I want everybody in consulting to understand the consulting. You can have, we call them majors and minors. You can have majors and minors, but you always have to be good at consulting. You got to be good at getting the client there. So anyway,
foundational consulting skills, the how you think, right? The point that you were on earlier, it cascades across whatever kind of consulting you want to do, and then even beyond that to strategic problem solving and executive presence and communication, and all of those things will serve you well, no matter what your path ultimately ends up being. I strongly believe that, right, that underpinning of those consulting skills, which is why you see consultative selling, why you see right? You add the word consultant on the front of a bunch of other functional terms, and it's because some of the foundations there cut across a lot of different disciplines.
Oh yeah, the capabilities. If you'll master this, you're well. Hey, there are more CEOs or C-level executives in the West that came out of consulting than any other background by far. 10, 20 times. So listen, thanks. Reach out to Drew. Wonderful guy. Get to know him. He does have as you said, he does have the blessing of being with a well-known firm that seems to be performing well in the market. So there you go.
Yes, he does. Yeah, please reach out to Drew and check him out on LinkedIn and otherwise. If you enjoyed this and what Drew had to say and you want more of it, check out our YouTube page or Spotify or Apple Podcasts and like and subscribe. And then if you want to get a hold of Dean or I, our respective LinkedIn's are the best place to do that. But you can also email us at podcast@consultantsway.com and we'll respond to you there as well. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.